The new week in Beyond the Gates begins under an unnatural calm, the kind that comes only before something breaks. From October 13th to 17th, the Dupree community teeters on the edge of revelation and ruin. The secrets that once hid behind closed doors now seep into daylight, twisting alliances and testing loyalties in ways no one can undo. A storm brews beneath the polished smiles and manicured facades. Naomi faces the consequences of a truth she can no longer bury. Vernon and Anita are forced into a pact that tastes like poison, and Danny's guilt threatens to ignite a chain reaction that could consume them all. What began as whispers will turn to screams, and by the end of the week, the gates that once kept the darkness out may no longer hold anything in. The air inside the Dupree enclave grew heavier with each passing hour, thick with secrets no one dared name aloud. It began with whispers, soft enough to seem harmless, about Naomi, whose trembling composure betrayed her more than any confession could. Eyes followed her across manicured lawns and along the marble corridors of the community center, where she moved like someone already condemned. The rumor of a child she carried spread like a fever, quick and consuming. Danny watched her from a distance, studying the way Naomi's hands lingered too long on her stomach, the way her smile faltered whenever someone mentioned Jacob's name. Doubt had a scent, and it clung to Naomi like perfume. Danny could feel it, could almost taste the bitterness that came when she began to wonder if the child belonged to someone else, someone Naomi could never name. Leslie, meanwhile, moved through the same world with a different kind of poison. Her words were crafted to wound, and when she sent a message to June, just a few sentences but sharp enough to pierce through denial, it left a bruise that no one could see. June sat for hours afterward, the glow of her phone still burning in her mind, realizing that what she thought was love might have been nothing but a transaction wrapped in affection. Her reflection in the window no longer looked like hers, it looked like someone waiting for punishment. And she knew Leslie had not merely warned her, she had marked her. Elsewhere, Donnell stared at the letter that had arrived without a return address. The offer was absurdly simple: wealth, security, and the kind of power men in his position only dreamed of. All he needed to do was accept. There was no mention of what would follow, no name attached to the promise, but in the back of his mind, he could hear the whisper of a debt already forming. The kind that did not ask for money but for a piece of the soul. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket, feeling the weight of it as though it were a stone pulling him underwater. Shanice worked in silence at the community office, her computer humming with half-finished reports and numbers that no longer made sense. She had stumbled upon something, two fragments of information that refused to align, like puzzle pieces from different worlds. The first was a familiar name, one that had disappeared from official records years ago but had suddenly resurfaced in an offshore account linked to a Dupree investment. The second was a pattern in the finances, money funneled quietly into something buried under layers of shell companies. And at the center, one signature appeared again and again: Vernon Dupree. The discovery made her hands tremble, not from fear, but from the understanding that everything inside the gates was built on a lie. Anita and Vernon spent their mornings pretending to cooperate, as if the performance itself could hold back the rot spreading through their empire. They smiled for photographs, shook hands at fundraisers, and rehearsed lines of loyalty in front of others. But when the doors closed, their voices sharpened into blades. They both knew the truth: they were no longer partners but co-conspirators bound by necessity. What had once been love was now an alliance forged in panic. Anita could not forgive Vernon's ambition, and Vernon could not forgive her knowledge. Their marriage had become a war without soldiers, fought entirely in glances and silences. Vanessa sat alone one night, her message to Joey already sent. The decision had cost her more than she could admit. She had asked him to choose between love and loyalty, and she knew even before he answered that either choice would destroy them. When the reply came, brief and cold, it cut deeper than any argument could. In that moment, she understood that betrayal was not always loud, it could be quiet, composed, and final. She poured herself another drink, staring into the amber liquid as if it could tell her how much of her life was already lost. Bill's gift arrived without ceremony, wrapped in plain brown paper. It was a small object, an old pen, tarnished but elegant. Harmless, he thought, until he noticed the initials etched faintly into the side, the same initials tied to a cover-up from decades past. The pen was proof that someone knew what he had done, or at least what he had helped bury. He felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Across town, Smitty gathered the family for an announcement that sounded like hope but tasted like a threat. He spoke of the future of the family, a phrase that left everyone uneasy. Tyrell and Samantha exchanged glances, uncertain if they had just heard a promise or a warning. By midweek, the fragile calm was gone. Andre's questions came like ghosts resurrected, forcing Danny to confront the life she had spent years trying to forget. Every memory she had locked away returned, one by one, each carrying a fragment of pain she had refused to feel. Guilt pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. Leslie, meanwhile, was busy constructing another trap, this time for Ted. She resurrected stories from their past, weaponizing his weaknesses. When she reminded him of what he had done, she didn't need to say what would happen if he didn't comply. He understood. The fear in his eyes was enough. Kat stood before her mother for the first time in years, not as a daughter but as an accuser. The silence between them was the kind that precedes storms. For a moment, she thought reconciliation might be possible. But the truth had waited too long, festering until it became something monstrous. The confrontation did not heal, it reopened a wound so deep that both of them bled in silence. Their shared past, buried under 2 decades of lies, erupted to the surface, leaving them hollow. Neither could remember who had started the war, only that it would never end. Randy received the message at dusk, written in code only he could decipher. The words were simple but final, a name, a location, and a deadline. It was a death order disguised as duty. He read it 3 times, trying to find meaning in the cruelty, wondering if he had chosen this path or if it had chosen him. By then, the darkness had already begun to move through the community, creeping from one house to another, invisible but suffocating. Thursday arrived wrapped in false serenity. The air was still, deceptively calm, but beneath it the panic pulsed. Chelsea woke to find her mother's belongings scattered, her jewelry box open, a few pieces missing. It seemed trivial at first, petty theft in a neighborhood of luxury, but the violation burrowed deep. Someone had entered their sanctuary. By afternoon, she realized something far more dangerous had been taken, not an object, but a letter that had been hidden inside the box, a letter her mother had sworn never existed. From that moment, nothing in her house felt safe again. Haley's birthday gift to Bill, a gesture of affection, went astray, intercepted by hands that knew exactly what to do with it. Within hours, a secret that had survived years in silence began to unravel. The community thrived on appearances, and when those appearances cracked, the truth spilled out like oil, impossible to contain. Naomi and Jacob met under the weight of their own lies, standing on opposite sides of a truth neither could carry. The space between them filled with blame, fear, and exhaustion. The future they had imagined was dissolving, and Naomi knew she could no longer hide the truth. Her hands trembled not from shame but from release, even destruction could feel like relief when the burden became unbearable. Martin had always lived in the shadows, observing, calculating, surviving. But now the shadows spoke to him with a new voice, a proposal that could shift the balance of everything. Revenge was an intoxicant, and the offer in front of him promised it in abundance. Yet beneath the thrill of retribution lurked a quieter temptation, the chance to end it all, to finally stop fighting ghosts. The choice haunted him as the days shortened, as if time itself was pushing him toward a conclusion he could not avoid. Friday came dressed as celebration. The Dupree residence shimmered with light, laughter, and the illusion of control. Guests mingled, unaware that beneath their feet, fault lines were ready to break. Nicole and Ted stood side by side, the picture of marital stability, until the screen above them flickered to life. For a moment, no one understood what they were seeing, the video, the faces, the betrayal laid bare. Then silence fell, sharp and absolute. The revelation was merciless: Ted's affair, not with a stranger, but with someone bound to the Dupree family by blood and trust. Nicole's expression didn't change, it shattered. Around them, conversations died, and the applause meant for their anniversary turned into murmurs of disbelief. The destruction was total, immediate, and irreparable. Across the room, Eva and Tomas clutched documents they had finally deciphered, realizing their lives had been a fabrication orchestrated by unseen hands. Their contracts, investments, even the property they lived in, it was all a facade. They were puppets in a show that had already written their ending. Their future dissolved into paperwork and betrayal, their ambitions reduced to dust. And in the chaos that followed, one figure remained detached. Kat stood near the edge of the terrace, watching as everything burned, not literally, but with the same sense of annihilation. The noise of the party faded into a hum, the screams and gasps becoming part of the background. She smiled, not with joy, but with the satisfaction of inevitability. She had waited years for this moment, to see the empire that had swallowed her life finally collapse under its own corruption. When she whispered, no one heard her words, but her lips moved with a calm certainty, as though reciting a prayer meant only for herself. The lights went out. The sound of glass breaking followed, then the panic, the shuffling feet, the rising hysteria. Somewhere in the darkness, a scream tore through the air, sharp, final, and human. The crowd scattered, blind in the blackout. In the brief flashes of emergency light, faces appeared, distorted, terrified, unrecognizable. Someone fell. Someone ran. And somewhere, in the corner where the cameras had failed, a shadow moved with purpose. When the power returned, everything had changed. Blood on marble. Silence heavier than grief. The Dupree gates stood closed, but what they were keeping out no longer mattered. What mattered was what they had let in. By dawn, the community looked the same from the outside. The manicured lawns, the guarded smiles, the perfectly arranged facades, all intact. But inside, every heart beat differently. Every secret that had been whispered now echoed. The walls of the Dupree estate no longer protected, they imprisoned. In that hollow quiet, the legacy of wealth, love, and deceit intertwined into something unrecognizable. The sun rose, indifferent, over a paradise turned to ruin. And somewhere behind drawn curtains, someone wept, not for what had been lost, but for what had been revealed. By the end of the week, the Dupree enclave stood in uneasy silence, its manicured beauty reduced to an illusion trembling under the weight of too many truths. The lies that once bound them together had turned to ash, scattered by the same storm they tried to contain. Naomi's secret no longer whispered but screamed through every corridor, a haunting reminder that even love could rot when buried too deep. Vernon and Anita's uneasy truce had begun to decay, poisoned by old betrayals that refused to die. Danny drifted between guilt and resignation, knowing that what she tried to protect was already beyond saving. Across the community, fear settled like dust, on doorknobs, in mirrors, in the quiet pauses between heartbeats. The Duprees, once symbols of power and control, were now prisoners of their own creation, trapped behind gates that had become their cage. And somewhere, unseen but ever present, the darkness that had crept in waited patiently for the next crack in their perfect world, because in beyond the gates, the end is never truly an ending, only the quiet before the next collapse.